And in they go, and... Whoa. My goodness. What have we done? I want to talk about knights. Don't worry, not maximising the damage or stacking the effectiveness and having an army of a few merry men, that's been done to death. I want to talk about events. You know, those little pop-ups you get in battle. They are random and occasionally amusing, but thanks to the law of averages, they can be taken advantage of and exploited. Actually, it turns out there's a few quirks that can get quite gimmicky if you know what you're doing, and intuition sort of goes out the window. It's one of those areas of combat where character traits have a massive influence on outcome, and I think that's fun. It adds a few more unknowns into the mix. So, let's begin and see why I find this so interesting. So in its current state, there are two types of events in Crusader Kings. Special events being tied to Berserkers and Shield Maidens, and at any start date limited to Norse characters of a Norse faith, outside of conversion and cultural hybridization anyway. Otherwise, there are your bog standard negative events: wounding, maiming, brain injuries, and death, and as we'll see in a minute, technically nothing. The chance of any of these events occurring is calculated through weightings. Nothing has a weight of 2000, wounding 100, maiming 40, brain injury 1, and death 30. And these weights are modified depending on your personality traits and prowess. So, for example, if you had a terrible night and therefore the base weight, the chance of wounding would be 100 out of 2171. Hope this makes sense, as it only gets more complicated from here. Your prowess modifier is a value of 1 to 0.1, the higher the prowess, the closer to the minimum it gets. For wounding this is around about 36, and for maiming and death around about 27. There's a modifier if you're brave, and that will double the weighting, and that's not a good thing, and if you're a craven it will halve the weighting, and that is good. If you're wounded or have the maim trait, the chance of nothing happening goes up, because understandably they'd probably be hanging back a bit. And there's some other tidbits, but it's not worth discussing. What is important here is that if you're a craven, you have half the chance of something bad happening and a quadruple chance compared to that of someone who's brave. But to balance this out, the brave trait comes with +2 prowess and the craven trait -2. You may be thinking the odds seem a little bit high, and you'd be right. What really happens is there's a cool-off. After an event, or non-event if nothing happens, there is a full day cool-off before the next event is going to occur. For some reason this is written as 5 days in the config, and it would also appear that what day within those 5 days is spread randomly between all your knights. So you know that within the first 5 days of battle, at least every knight has had one event check. If you hit the maimed event, you can either get disfigured, one-eyed, one-legged, or the bog standard maimed trait. Each with their own subweights, and you can even get made incapable after that, so it's all starting to get very complicated. Weirdly, if you get the maimed trait, it's the only one that you don't get wounded with, which is pretty odd, because this man is clearly missing an arm, and he lost it today. Also, I should mention that for every time you get a wounding event, you will rank up to a worse state. From fine, to wounded, to severely injured, to brutally mauled, and inevitably, death. So once you're at tier 3, basically any event will end your night. Here is a chart showing the chance of any given event occurring within 5 days of battle for a few flavours of knight, showing ultimately that the closest you can get to immortality for now is to have a craven knight with at least 36 prowess in total, bringing the risk of anything bad happening down to a tiny under 0.5%, with the highest possible chance of disaster sitting with a somehow 0 prowess brave knight. But these are the outcomes for one event. What about a whole battle? Or maybe even a war? To get an idea of performance, because this is all rather random, it's probably easier to show all the outcomes on a graph. Simplifying it a bit by dropping the incapable event and some of the extra unlucky things that can happen when maimed, let's look at the total damage for 100 days of battle, so 20 events, for a bog standard knight of 15 prowess, and plot it all against the total probability below cumulatively. So, for example, we can see that for brave knights, due to their increased prowess, reach the highest possible damage, but due to their flagrant disregard for their health, have the smallest chance of reaching that damage. So the chance of a brave knight doing the max damage of 3600 is just over 20%, and the chance of them getting below 2500 damage is also around 20% because of injury and fatalities, etc. Essentially, anything that isn't 3600 means they were injured on the way, and that's around the 75% mark. Yikes. The The opposite is true for Craven. He's more likely to survive, but also isn't contributing as much. But that said, if you had a Craven Knight for a key role like, say, an Accolade, he is far more likely to stick around and give you those sweet bonuses, and also has a reduced chance of being caught if you lose, which is nice. You can run this to 250 days, so 50 events. Admittedly, I had to simplify as my computer was melting by this point, but weirdly, the generic knight is now on par with the Brave Knight for average damage. It seems the Brave Knight's cavalier attitude is caught up with him, which I thought was rather funny. That said, the model does start to fall apart. No battle is 250 days, and there are days in between where knights can recover, or wounds can fester and they never get back up again. And anyway, if your project is to get the highest prowess ever, once you hit the 30 plus mark, the risk to any Brave Knight really does start to become tiny. But if you want an Accolade and he's Craven, hey man, he is not going to perish. And if you have a family member or heir who is keen, but somewhat incompetent, and you want to remove him from inheritance, enlisting him as a knight might be an easy way to fix that. So what about the exciting events? Most notably berserkers, men of a notable temperament who shout people to death and strangle them with their entrails, and just generally chop people to pieces. To have access to the berserkers in your culture, you need to be North Germanic, following a Germanic faith, or a faith with a warmonger tenant. Firstly, there's the event to become a berserker. This has a weight of 30, the chance of it occurring increases 5-fold with Wrathful and Giant, 3-fold with Impatient, double with Sadistic, Brave and Ambitious, and there are some other traits that reduce the chance. And after that you get a neat trait and are now eligible for berserker events. The Berserker Battle event has a weight of 32, and the soul modifiers for this are doubling with Wrathful and 10-fold with Giant. To be eligible for this event, you need to have at least one enemy knight with under 80% of your Berserker's prowess in battle. And once the event triggers, an eligible knight will be selected at random and executed, which is pretty wild, and this can happen indefinitely. For example, in this army here with a Soul Berserker, only these knights are eligible for being dispatched. The other chap's prowess is simply too high. Being able to indefinitely execute some of the biggest damage dealers in your enemy's army is pretty cool, and useful, but can you take advantage of it? Assuming you were lucky enough to get a Berserker, one who is neither a Giant or Wrathful, the odds of him triggering the Berserk event are quite low. But if you're lucky enough someone with those traits, well then your odds increase massively. And now there's a 20% chance every 5 days for your knight to dispatch an eligible enemy knight. The more angry Giants you have in your army, the better your odds. With 3, there is now a 55% chance of at least one enemy knight being strangled to death with his own intestines every 5 days. So, you can scour the land looking for the most eligible berserkers, or you can start your own breeding program, churn out some giants and hope you're lucky with the education and getting Wrathful. But that isn't quite it. There is one final event I haven't covered. The Shield Maiden event, and for that, to get a Shield Maiden, all you need to do is get one of the following 2 traditions, and a member of your close family who is a woman and has a prowess of 12 or above. Once you fit their criteria in battle, it can trigger the Shield Maiden event, which is actually identical to the Berserker event, so she'll be equally shouting people to death, strangling them with her entrails and all that good stuff, and without even going berserk. The event has the same weight and modifiers to increase the chance. Where it gets really cool is that Shield Maidens can also be berserkers themselves, so you can see where this is going. Once you have a Giant, Wrathful and Berserk Shield Maiden, they'll essentially have a 38% chance of dispatching an eligible enemy knight every 5 days. That means with 3 of these women, you have an almost 80% chance of dispatching at least one enemy knight in 5 days. And if you have, we'll say, 15 days of fighting, so 3 events each, there is now a 99% chance that an enemy knight will be shouted to death. So the question is, if I played a character who was a giant and went about breeding a perfect family of Amazonians, would that give me the perfect anti-knight army? There are a few things going for us. Firstly, that men and women have exactly the same amount of prowess, except for during pregnancy. This means that by purely being a Shield Maiden, she'll have an extra 3 prowess. Being a close member of our family isn't an issue if we're using breeding for key traits like strength and gigantism, which could be further reinforced with dynasty bonuses. Being our children means we can also control their education and hopefully get wrathful. And finally, being the sexist time that it is, they are ineligible for inheritance, ensuring they hang around your court. My perfect Praetorian Guard. And following those policies, here's a game I played earlier. To start the game, I produced this absolute lad. Herculean, giant and wrathful. For a laugh, I picked the oft undervalued seduction tree and set about wooing all the giant ladies of the world. With them seduced, they flocked to my court and promptly agreed to be my concubines, though I consistently seemed to be caught. Then I started my breeding program, swapping out infertile giants for new ones, and all my children were subsequently educated by very angry people. With 2 parents as giants, having children getting a giant trait was fairly trivial. Getting wrathful was a bit more difficult. There's no easy way to say this, but to trigger the event to get wrathful, your child needs to have a bully, which sounds like a horrible thing to do, and well, that's because it is. To ensure you have an obnoxious brat to bully your child, there needs to be other children in your realm, so ideally your realm is of sufficient size so you have vassals and they have children of their own. For example, this little girl here, a sadistic brute, has tormented my son, and because of that he has now got the much needed wrathful trait. Once you've maximised the chance of your children getting a bully, you need to only ensure they're educated by an equally wrathfully person, which increases the chance of that event occurring threefold. And when the event does occur, they're pretty much guaranteed to go with the trait the tutor has. So, 20-something years later, here are the results. Marvellous, isn't it? I was a tad unlucky with the number of daughters, but of the daughters I did have, I am blessed that most of them are angry. Finally, to get the Berserker trait, all we need to do is get them to fight as much as possible, and now we can marvel at the results. The life expectancy of a knight has plummeted, though admittedly I was starting to run out of adversaries to fight, and because of that I couldn't bump up the numbers much anymore. So with that done, it is time for a review. Let's ask the ultimate question. Is it worth it? So, is being able to bump off knights valuable? The AI isn't exactly able to maximise the knight's damage like a player can, but that said, it's one of the few ways to shorten the life expectancy of any serving noble during a war. Not that you have much control, mind you. So the second question is it fun? Well, of course it is. But either way, at least we now fully understand the mechanics of knight events. And we can officially say that the best knight in the game is a giant wrathful berserker shield maiden daughter/sister. So I hope you enjoyed this video, more to come.